Hi, this is Gabe from MotoringFile. We're in the 2025 Mini Cooper S, the F66. I'm actually on Mini Takes the States. It's actually day 3 for me, one of the last days, and we're heading west in western Montana to Idaho, driving on some incredible roads just west of the Flathead Reservation, alongside the Clark Fork River. And I could not imagine a better location to be driving this car, especially given the fact I have to drive a ton of miles. So it's beautiful roads, beautiful country. And you could call it a beautiful car. It's certainly a bright car. This is a sunny side yellow Mini Cooper S. It is of course, an automatic. The manual is gone from this car, but there's a lot new. We've tested this car already. This is the first really legitimate amount of miles put on it. And so far, it's been incredibly comfortable. And I say incredible because you don't expect much. This is a Mini Cooper S, more specifically, and it is traditionally not a car you want to put 1,000 miles on over highway over the course of a day or two. But revised suspension damping, really has changed, I would say, the comfort levels of this car over long distances. From a performance standpoint, this does have more power than before, has a little more torque. There's a 7-speed DCT, which is very good. I think that's what's interesting to me is how predictive it can be in corners, and it uses GPS to sort of understand where it should be downshifting, and of course how you drive. I have it set in go-kart mode right now, which is the old sport mode, so it's a different algorithm for the shift points, and the throttle mapping is a little bit more aggressive as well. And it's also, from a suspension standpoint, slightly revised. Feels great. So, everything feels great. It does not have shift paddles, so I am a passenger in a lot of respects. No ability to sort of change gear typically. That is not the end of the world if you've got if you've got a transmission that is this good, and it truly is. Shift paddles likely are coming back or coming to the US in some form. Of course, we don't get the JCW style where you'll find shift paddles, and the forthcoming JCW, the full JCW of this car, will have them. So rest assured, there will be ways to get them. But that out of the way, let's talk about this car, and let's talk about what it's like to drive this thing over some distance. For one, the seats. Let's talk about comfort. I mean, I'm sitting in the new sport seats. These are technically speaking, just the standard sport seats or standard seats. They have less bolstering, and initially I was pretty down on them. I didn't think that they represented sort of the best of what Mini had to offer, and I thought it was a downgrade. And I've changed my mind to some degree. There is not as much for me lateral support. I'd like more, but they're not bad. And I think with the Veskin interior, which is much higher quality than before, the material quality, the design, they're pretty good. So much higher quality than the former sort of the standard leather or the non-lounge leather, which is great. I mean, I generally speaking, I thought that was just a pretty subpar material. This is not. The steering wheel is also much improved. The Veskin on the steering wheel feels almost at lounge leather levels of feel, for lack of a better term, refinement. It's really, really nice. Navigation, of course, Mini OS 9 is a huge improvement. Now, this is the third new Mini I've driven in the past 3 days, and every one of them has been a little different in terms of bugs. The first one, the JCW that I had, the JCW Countryman, it was perfect. There are no bugs, nothing at all. This has been a little bit, I'm going to do a quick turnaround here. It's had to reboot once so far, which was interesting. It's not something that I was expecting because I hadn't seen those issues in the past. But once it gets going, it tends to be okay. So I'm not gonna completely call it out yet. This is an early version, and I've been told to expect software updates on an ongoing basis. Mini's not ready to say exactly when that's going to happen, but that definitely is the plan. Just checking to make sure that's still recording. It is. So we've got a brand new car in a lot of respects, but it's built on top of the old car. So this is the F56 underneath, way underneath. There's a couple things shared, glass for one of them, and I think door panels, but that's it. Engines are also shared. But everything else is different. Tire size is different. The track is wider. So there's been a lot of updates that Mini has made, some very subtle, that add up to an improved driving experience. From a sort of a enthusiast perspective, I think it's going to be difficult to get past the lack of a manual transmission and the lack of shift paddles. That, let's just be honest, it sucks. It'll come back, the shift paddles, not the manual, and it'll solve that problem. So with that out of the way, it really is improved in every regard. There's a really, really nice quality to this car, even over some of the rough pavement that we see sometimes in the western states, especially in northern Montana. And so it's something that feels more livable than before. As a daily, I would look at this as something that's much easier to live with and much easier to enjoy in every scenario, which I think is a really, really important point for potential owners, because oftentimes you look at this and you think, well, I can get by the space, but can I get by the comfort? Can I figure out how to sort of work this into my daily life and not, I don't want to have my molars rattle out. I don't want to, constantly be beat up. And so far, I can say you're really not going to get beat up with this car. This is a very different proposition than it was 5, 6, and certainly 10 plus years ago from a Mini Cooper standpoint. Otherwise, there's a lot of things that we're still learning about this car. Of course, the interior design, exterior design is refreshed, but there aren't a lot of choices yet. So when you choose a style, you're stuck with that interior more or less. You can change the color of seats, but dash and things like that will stay the same. So it's just, there's some things that I think Mini will figure out eventually. And it's not to say that the design is bad or anything in particular is off. It is limiting, more limiting than we've ever seen before. Otherwise, it's a fantastic car. It's also really quick, and I don't mean JCW quick, but there's a clear increase in speed in terms of acceleration. So it's more livable. I would actually think it's actually better looking than before. It's less fussy. There's less fake stuff on it, less fake vents, unless you're talking about this fake strap over here on the dash, which the intention was was to be functional. It is not, unfortunately. But otherwise, this is a very honest car in terms of its design aesthetic. Everything generally serves a purpose, which is really great considering that's really the ethos of the original Mini. So there's a lot of, I'd say, Mini DNA in the design of this car that honestly wasn't there in the previous generation, which is really cool to see. But there's some interesting things. There's no exhaust pipes visible. We've talked about the transmission. There's some things that have changed that people will probably take some time to get used to. There's no hood scoop anymore because, of course, the hood scoop wasn't really serving a purpose. So it's a car that's much more honest than before. I like that. I like that a lot. And in my experience in driving this car thus far, let's just say that it has shift paddles, for instance. Let's get that out of the way. I would find this much more interesting of a proposition as a daily driver than the F56. Now, if you're hung up on the manual thing, then you're hung up on it, and there's nothing that's going to solve that. And I completely empathize with that. It's really unfortunate. But if you can get past that, and you go for the JCW with the shift paddles, or you wait a little bit and see if Mini brings them back, I think you've got a great car here that serves, I would say, more of the buying public than before, with more comfort, more tech. The ADAS system, the autonomous driving system on the highways is fantastic. There's much more safety features here than before, including blind spot monitoring and automatic braking, things like that, which is all defeatable, of course. This is a car that really makes more sense to more people, and that's what Mini needs. They need to be able to reach a wider audience, and they need their products to have less excuses for them. Products that just work for the average consumer looking for a sporty small car, something that is going to be safe, reliable, really cool to drive, and of course great to look at. And I think that this car more than ever does that for Mini. So a lot of wins in my book. You already know some of the critiques I have around the transmission, lack of transmission choice, and of course the lack of shift paddles, but some of that will go away. Now, I will say, without the shift paddles, I think what you don't get is a confused transmission. And I say that because we did have some issues with the JCW Countryman where there was some hesitation when you did click to shift. There was some hesitation off the line. There was some software issues, I would say, that need to be worked out there. That does not show up in this car because you're not pushing the car as much with those without shift paddles. You just can't, kind of on its own, you're on its terms. Which I guess is sort of a good or bad thing, because you're not having any issues with any of those little hiccups. You're letting the car do what it needs to do, and it does a pretty good job. Like I said, it's very predictive in the way it needs to shift, where it feels like it should be shifting, and really understanding what you need, which is cool. I think it's a really, really nice improvement over what we've seen in the past several years. So all in, this is a big improvement, and it is a car that I feel was really, really needed for the brand. And when we think about this as the last petrol-powered Mini Cooper, which is crazy to say, this generation, it's going to last 7 years, this is it. And as a baseline, as a foundation for those next 7 years, because as you can imagine, there'll be, of course, a JCW product. There might be a GP. We're going to see things like, as I mentioned before, shift paddles come back. We're going to see other options come back, or options sort of arrive. Styles, colors, limited edition, all those things. You get a sense that this is really the start of something pretty cool. And in that regard, I think this is such a welcome change. So the 2025 Mini Cooper S, it is a big change for Mini, and it's a welcome one. Now let's just get those shift paddles back.